Welcome back to the podcast.
We have a great show for you today.
Welcome to the debate. So, picture this for a second. Have you ever walked into a huge, fancy networking event and you suddenly realize you are completely underdressed and you just absolutely panic? Have you ever felt that?
Oh, definitely. Laugh. Yeah, that sudden cold sweat, just absolute panic.
Yeah, me too. It is terrifying. Or, imagine your entire career plan, the one you've spent 10 years building, just collapses overnight. In those moments of total free fall, the people who actually survive and rebuild, well, they aren't the loud ones. They aren't the people delivering these big inspirational speeches.
Right, because that performative confidence, wait, hold on. Performative is a pretty fancy word. It basically just means acting like you're confident just for an audience. That kind of fake loud confidence completely evaporates when real chaos hits.
Exactly.
We are so conditioned to look for the visible superhero indicators of power. But real survival doesn't wear a cape.
No, it doesn't. It operates entirely under the radar. The strengths that actually keep us from shattering are usually invisible. So we are looking today at what the source material calls quiet superpowers. These are the understated, highly unglamorous traits that shape our character and dictate exactly how we survive the darkest seasons of our lives.
It is the absolute opposite of the superhero narrative. It's just deeply human, quiet survival.
But where that quiet strength actually comes from, that is where we disagree today. I represent the position that true quiet strength derives from structural, internal fortitude. And fortitude is just a strong word for deep inner endurance. I argue that resilience comes from strict discipline and consistency. It is the ability to weather the storm.
I approach this from a completely different angle. While structure is nice, I represent the position that true strength emerges from fluid responsiveness, which is basically the ability to adapt and change your shape quickly. It's about using emotional intuition and composure when reality shifts around you.
Which brings us to the big question for today's debate. When life knocks us down, is it the rigid armor of our habits that saves us, or our ability to change our shape to fit the new reality? Let me jump in with my perspective first.
Go for it.
I believe that quiet strength is, it's built brick by brick. It's a structural project. The source material makes this profound point about struggle. It says struggle strips away the ego. It takes away our exhausting need to always look perfectly put together. And what is left behind is a steadfast core. But how do you actually keep that core strong when everything hurts? The secret is consistency. Because let's face it, motivation is incredibly moody. It's like biological weather. It shows up one day when you've had enough sleep, and then it just completely vanishes the next day.
Oh, absolutely. Motivation is terrible.
Right? So consistency is the ultimate tool. Doing the boring, unglamorous things like forcing yourself to answer difficult emails or saving a little money every week, that builds what I call evidence-based confidence. And the guardian of that consistency is discipline.
Okay, but discipline sounds so rigid.
People think of it as a punishment, but I see discipline as protection. It is love in a serious form. It guards your future self against your temporary emotions. Think of consistency like the concrete foundation of a house. You can have beautiful, adaptable architecture, but without that rigid concrete at the base, any emotional intelligence is just a house built on sand. When the ground shakes, you just wash away.
That is a very cool metaphor. But let me challenge that foundation idea. Your house metaphor assumes the ground beneath it is mostly stable, right? And that the biggest threat is just a passing storm. But what happens when the ground itself completely liquefies?
What do you mean?
Well, life inherently loves surprise. Things change so fast now. Rigidity is incredibly dangerous. Think about a massive corporate restructuring. You could have the most perfectly disciplined, structured daily routine of any manager in your whole company. But if your entire department gets automated overnight, your perfect routine is utterly useless.
I mean, sure, but...
If your strength is based on unbending discipline, You are incredibly vulnerable when reality refuses to follow your schedule. I argue that the real power is adaptability. It's the ability to update your own operating system. When sudden change hits, a responsive person uses composure.
Wait, let's pause there. Composure is a great word. Basically, it just means staying calm and in control of your feelings, right?
Exactly. Thank you. Yes, it's a calm state that lets you accept reality faster. Instead of fighting the change, composure lets you ask, how do I move with this? And to do that, you need discernment, which let's translate that too. Discernment is the ability to judge things clearly and understand your own emotions. Without it, you are just blindly forcing discipline on yourself for no reason.
I see why you think that. I really do. But let's look at what actually happens during the initial shock of a huge crisis. The material suggests that struggle teaches you how to weather the storm without falling apart. Absorbing the blow is the first step.
Just absorbing it?
Yes, just staying with yourself through a difficult season. Not winning, not fixing it immediately, just staying firm. That structural endurance is what builds true grit. The grit to just remain in place when you desperately want to run away. That is the real victory.
But simply absorbing punishment isn't a superpower. In fact, just staying in place when the environment has turned toxic, that can be really unhealthy. Enduring a struggle without adapting leads to a state I like to call panic with a smile.
Panic with a smile? Okay, you have to unpack the psychology of that for me.
Yeah, it's basically a trauma response masquerading as productivity. And wait, masquerading is a fancy word. It just means hiding or pretending to be something else.
Got it. Pretending to be productive.
Exactly. You see this all the time in highly disciplined people. Everything in their life is emotionally on fire. Their relationship has collapsed or their career is failing, but they pretend everything is totally fine because they are weathering the storm.
Well, they are holding it together.
But they are only performing the structure. They keep their morning routine, they hit their gym goals, but psychologically, they are completely disconnected from reality. Because they tied their whole identity to their habits, they keep doing them even when the world those habits belong to is gone. True strength isn't white-knuckling through the storm. It's looking at the wreckage and saying, my old habits won't save me, I need to change.
That is an interesting point, but I think you are mischaracterizing the actual purpose of the routine in that terrifying moment. The way you survive the absolute chaos of trauma is exactly through that rigid consistency.
How so?
Well, when your emotional world shatters, your prefrontal cortex, which is the fancy science term for the decision-making part of your brain, it just completely gets overwhelmed. It goes offline. In that moment, your structure is the only thing that remembers who you are. The routine does the remembering for you.
It's a failsafe.
Exactly. It is a failsafe. You don't have to decide whether to get out of bed. The habit decides for you. It keeps you moving until you actually have the brain power to adapt later.
Okay, I am not denying that a failsafe is useful, but a failsafe isn't a strategy for living. It is emergency life support. If you stay in that mode forever, you never actually process what happened to you.
But you need the emergency life support to stay alive long enough to process it. And this brings us to restraint. I point to restraint as the ultimate life skill.
Restraint. So, holding back?
Yes. Discipline is exactly what stops you from sending that furious, career-ending email at 2 in the morning. It stops you from spending all your money when you are just anxious and want a quick thrill. Discipline is the literal mechanical gap you force between a bad feeling and a bad reaction. It keeps your head clear under extreme stress.
I hear you, but applying restraint without discernment is incredibly inefficient. It is the emotional equivalent of putting black tape over your car's check engine light.
Black tape?
Yeah, sure, you don't see the warning light anymore, but the engine is still burning out underneath. If you don't know why you are reacting, you are constantly fighting your own impulses. Let's look at the material's take on self-awareness. A disciplined person might say, I am being lazy, I must apply more discipline to force myself to work.
Because the work needs to get done.
But at what cost? A self-aware person uses discernment. They pause and realize, wait, I am not actually lazy. I am terrified of failing at this. Or
They realize they are pretending to be confused by a problem because they are actually just scared of the answer.
Right.
When you use discernment, you actually calm down the amygdala. Wait, amygdala, that's the fear center of the brain. By accurately naming your fear, you turn off the panic alarm. You solve the problem at the root instead of just locking it in a cage of discipline.
I am highly skeptical of that approach, honestly. I think it deeply underestimates the seductive power of human rationalization.
What do you mean?
What you call deep self-analysis is very often just sophisticated storytelling. We use it to let ourselves off the hook. We can sit in therapy or write in a journal for years about why we are afraid of failure. But eventually, that analysis just becomes a fancy form of procrastination.
You think analyzing your feelings is procrastination?
Sometimes, yes. We spin these complex stories to avoid doing the hard, terrifying work. Restraint cuts through all that noise. Frankly, it does not matter why you want to send the angry message. What matters is that you have the structural fortitude to put the phone down. Action comes before feeling. Putting the phone down builds something that endless thinking cannot. True confidence.
Okay, but how are you defining true confidence here? Because if it is just the ability to aggressively manage your symptoms, that sounds totally exhausting. That doesn't sound confident to me.
I define true confidence as empirical. And wait, let me use the translate rule here. Empirical basically means based on solid, real-world evidence.
Good translation.
Thanks. So it's a feedback loop. Every single time you hold steady, every time you keep a promise to yourself, even when you are emotional and want to quit, your mind learns to trust itself. You neurologically prove to yourself that your words mean something. It's a real data set of kept promises. And it is like this internal fortress that doesn't need anyone else's validation.
And here is exactly where your framework hits a huge wall, because it completely misses the reality of human life. We do not live in a vacuum. You are describing an isolated fortress, but life involves other people.
But you cannot control other people. You can only control your own fortress.
True, but you have to navigate them. The most underrated superpower in the material is actually external. It's active listening. It is interpersonal intuition.
So, reading the room.
Yes, picking up on the subtle signals, like a slight hesitation in a friend's voice or the unsaid tension in a meeting, that creates real connection. Real power isn't just controlling yourself in a fortress. It is navigating the emotional room so that conversations don't just become documentaries.
Wait, documentaries?
Yeah, the material talks about this. A documentary conversation is a rigid, predefined script. It happens when two people are talking but neither is adapting. They just recite their planned points. Your rigid discipline might keep you quiet. It might stop you from interrupting. But only fluid emotional intuition lets you actually hear the other person. You have to step out of your fortress to do that.
Let me push back on that exact point. Isn't active listening, isn't that deep intuition just a byproduct of having enough internal discipline to quiet your own ego first?
How so?
Can you truly listen to someone if you haven't first mastered the restraint to stop your own internal monologue? I would argue that emotional intelligence is really just the outward application of discipline. You cannot navigate a room if you haven't disciplined your own mind to stop making everything about you.
That is a clever way to flip it. But it confuses the mechanism of silence with the mechanism of curiosity. Restraint is just hitting the mute button on your mouth.
That's one way to put it.
It's true. You can be completely silent, showing perfect discipline, while your brain is frantically preparing your argument. That isn't listening. That is just disciplined waiting. True listening requires curiosity. You have to let go of your rigid framework and step into someone else's reality. The people who truly survive and thrive are the ones who read the emotional currents and sail with them.
But sailing requires a keel. A boat without a rigid structure underneath the water doesn't sail. It just drifts helplessly. And that is the huge risk of your adaptability. If you are constantly updating yourself, constantly reading the room to figure out how to act, you risk losing your core self entirely. You just become a mirror. That isn't strength. That is losing yourself.
It is only losing yourself if your adaptability lacks discernment. Discernment is the keel.
Updating yourself doesn't mean abandoning your values. It means changing how you express them when the environment changes. Let's look at composure again. It's not a rigid refusal to feel. It gives you the space to think. You evaluate rather than just blindly trusting a habit.
I will grant that discernment adds a very vital layer. Blind discipline without self-reflection can just make you march really efficiently in the wrong direction.
Exactly.
However, I maintain that when the pressure reaches its absolute peak, when you are exhausted or grieving, your discernment will fail. You just won't have the brain power to evaluate the room. And in that terrifying moment, you will fall back on your training. The discipline you built during the quiet days is the only net that catches you.
And I would counter that when the pressure is at its peak, forcing rigid discipline often breaks you. Sometimes the most powerful choice is to let the structure collapse a little, to show yourself some grace and trust that your adaptability will help you build a new structure later. The rigid tree snaps in a hurricane, right? The flexible reed bends, flattens to the ground, and survives to stand back up.
That brings us nicely to a close. Let's summarize where we landed. From my perspective, the true foundation of quiet strength is structural. It requires the deep fortitude to hold steady, exercise restraint, and build an unshakable empirical confidence through consistent action. True resilience is the architecture we build to protect ourselves.
And from my perspective, quiet strength is fundamentally fluid. It relies on deep discernment to read situations clearly. It demands adaptability and composure to navigate a changing world, rather than hiding in an isolated fortress. True resilience is our agile capacity to evolve.
Despite our different views, there's a big point of convergence here. We both entirely agree on the core idea from the material. Real strength is not loud.
Absolutely. No superhero costumes. The person commanding the room with loud confidence is often hiding a deep fragility. True power is in the quiet, deeply human responses to adversity. It's surviving a Tuesday when you feel like the world is ending.
Indeed. Before we go, we promised a quick word tour. Let's do a very slow, clear recap of 5 important words we used today. Number 1, fortitude. Basically, deep inner strength and endurance.
Number 2, fluid, meaning adaptable, able to change shape smoothly.
Number 3, discernment. The ability to judge things clearly and make good choices.
Number 4, empirical, based on real, solid evidence and action.
And number 5, composure. Staying calm and in control, especially during chaos.
Perfect.
Perhaps the real superpower is recognizing that our internal discipline and external adaptability are constantly talking to each other. Understanding that dialogue is the first step to resilience.
Life will definitely require both. The ground will shake, and how you survive is the most important decision you'll make.
So, the next time life knocks you down, ask yourself, will I rely on the rigid armor of my habits, or will I find the courage to adapt to the new reality?